The morning Elena Carter's life ended, the sky over Ashford Hollow was the color of old bruises, purple and gray, swollen with the threat of snow. She stood in the parlor of her family's house, watching her father sign away everything they had left, and thought distantly that she should feel something. Anger, maybe. Fear. But all she felt was numb. Her father's hand shook as he scratched his name across the bottom of the document. Thomas Carter had once been a proud man, the kind who held his head high when he walked through town, who shook hands firmly and looked people in the eye. Now he was bent like a question mark over the table, his collar too loose around his neck, his face gray with shame. Across from him sat Victor Hargrove. Hargrove didn't look like a villain. That was the problem. He looked like respectability itself, clean-shaven, well-dressed, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He owned the First Bank of Ashford Hollow, which meant he owned half the town, and he carried that power like a man who'd been born to it. "There," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. He set the pen down and pushed the paper across the table. "It's done." Hargrove picked up the document, examined it with the casual attention of a man inspecting a receipt, then folded it neatly and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I appreciate your cooperation, Thomas. This is better for everyone." "Better," Thomas repeated. The word came out bitter. Elena's mother stood by the window, silent. Margaret Carter hadn't spoken in 3 days. She just stood there, one hand pressed against the glass, staring out at nothing. Elena's younger brother, Daniel, had been sent to stay with their aunt in the next county. He was only 12. He didn't need to see this. "Elena," Hargrove said, turning his attention to her for the first time. His gaze was clinical, appraising. "Come here, dear." She didn't want to move, but her legs carried her forward anyway. She stopped a few feet from the table, close enough to see the neat stack of papers Hargrove had brought with him, close enough to smell the faint scent of tobacco and expensive cologne. "You're 19 now, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you understand the situation your family is in?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I understand my father owes you money he doesn't have. That's one way to put it." Hargrove's smile was thin. "Your father owes the bank $8,000, secured against this house and the land it sits on. The debt has been in arrears for 6 months. Normally, foreclosure would be immediate, but I've decided to offer an alternative arrangement." "An arrangement," Elena said flatly. "A marriage arrangement." Hargrove opened a leather folio and removed another document. "There's a man who lives up on Iron Pine Ridge. His name is Silas Mercer. He's in need of a wife, and he's willing to assume your father's debt in exchange." The room went very still. Elena stared at him. "You're selling me." "I'm offering you a solution," Hargrove corrected. "Your family keeps the house. Your father's debt is cleared, and you marry a man of property and means. It's a fair trade." "A fair—" Elena's voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I don't even know this man." "Few brides do before their wedding day. That's hardly unusual." "Who is he?" Hargrove's expression flickered, just for a moment, something that might have been amusement or calculation. "Silas Mercer is a timberman. He owns a significant portion of Iron Pine Ridge and operates a profitable lumber business. He's reclusive, admittedly, but that's not a crime." "Then why does he need to buy a wife?" "That's between you and him." Hargrove slid the document across the table. "This is a binding agreement. You marry Mercer within the week. In return, your father's debt is forgiven in full. If you refuse, foreclosure proceeds immediately, and your family will be out on the street by month's end." Elena looked at her father. Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. "Papa," she said quietly. He flinched. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. I tried everything." "Did you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Thomas's face crumpled. "I didn't know what else to do." Margaret finally spoke, her voice distant and hollow. "Sign it, Elena." Elena turned to her mother. "What?" "Sign it. Keep the house. Save your brother." "Mama, we don't have a choice." Margaret's hand pressed harder against the window glass, as if she could push through it and disappear. "Just sign it." Hargrove produced a pen and set it on the table in front of Elena. "I need your answer now." Elena's hands were shaking. She looked down at the document. Dense paragraphs of legal language she didn't fully understand. her name already typed in at the bottom next to a blank signature line. Above it, in bold print, marriage contract and debt transfer agreement. She thought about her brother, 12 years old. If they lost the house, where would he go? What would happen to him? She thought about her mother, already broken, her father, already hollow. And she thought about herself, 19 years old, with no money, no prospects, and no way out. If I sign this, she said slowly, the debt is cleared? Completely? Completely, Hargrove confirmed. And my family keeps the house? They do. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand was steadier than she expected. She signed her name in quick, deliberate strokes, Elena Marie Carter, and set the pen down. Good, Hargrove said. He took the document, added his own signature as witness, and slipped it into his folio. The wedding is set for Saturday. You'll travel to Iron Pine Ridge immediately afterward. I'll make the arrangements. Does he know? Elena asked. Does Mercer know you're doing this? Hargrove's smile returned, cold and precise. He knows exactly what he's getting. Timets. The wedding took place in the Ashford Hollow Courthouse on a Saturday morning so cold the windows were frosted white. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just Elena in a borrowed dress, a county judge who looked bored, and Silas Mercer. Elena saw her husband for the first time when he walked into the courtroom. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a build that suggested hard physical labor. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and he wore it longer than was fashionable, tied back at his neck. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, maybe older. It was hard to tell, but it was his eyes that made Elena's stomach drop. They were pale gray, cold as creek water, and when they landed on her, they didn't soften. He didn't look cruel. He looked indifferent. The judge ran through the ceremony in a monotone, barely pausing between words. Silas answered when required, I do, in a voice that was low and rough, like he didn't use it often. Elena's own voice came out small and distant, someone else's voice entirely. The judge pronounced them married. Silas didn't kiss her. He didn't even touch her. He just nodded once to the judge, then turned and walked out of the courtroom. Elena stood there, frozen, until Hargrove cleared his throat behind her. You should go with him, he said. He's waiting. She followed Silas outside, where a wagon was waiting. It was loaded with her trunk, her clothes, a few books, everything she owned in the world, packed into a battered leather case her father had given her that morning without a word. Silas climbed into the driver's seat. Elena hesitated, then climbed up beside him. He didn't look at her. He just picked up the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. They left Ashford Hollow in silence. The road up to Iron Pine Ridge was narrow and steep, carved into the side of the mountain like a scar. Snow had fallen the night before, and the wagon wheels crunched through the fresh powder, leaving deep tracks behind them. The air grew thinner and colder as they climbed. Elena pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, but it didn't help. The cold was inside her now, settled deep in her chest. Silas didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. Elena tried not to stare at him, but it was hard not to. He was a stranger. Her husband. She didn't even know his full name until the judge said it aloud, Silas James Mercer, and now she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with him. After an hour, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. How far is it? She asked. Another hour. His voice was flat, offering nothing. Elena waited, hoping he'd say more. He didn't. Do you live alone up there? Yes. No one else? No. Not even... She stopped herself. She'd been about to ask about servants, staff, anyone who might make the house feel less isolated, but the look on his face told her the answer. They climbed higher. The trees grew denser, tall pines crowding close to the road, their branches heavy with snow. Elena tried to imagine what her life would look like now. A house in the mountains, a husband who didn't speak, no neighbors, no friends, just silence and cold, and a man who looked at her like she was something he'd been forced to accept. Why did you agree to this? She asked suddenly. Silas's jaw tightened. That's not your concern. I think it is. I'm your wife now. You're my wife because Hargrove arranged it. That doesn't mean we need to pretend this is something it isn't. The words landed like a slap. Elena looked away, her throat tight. She'd known this marriage wasn't real, not in any way that mattered, but hearing him say it out loud made it worse somehow. "I didn't want this either," she said quietly. "Then we understand each other." Elena didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The wagon climbed higher. The road narrowed further, hugging the edge of a steep drop-off. Elena could see down into the valley below, where Ashford Hollow looked small and distant, already like something from another life. She thought about her father's face when she'd left that morning, gray and hollow and ashamed. She thought about her mother's silence, her brother's absence. She thought about the fact that she would never see them again. Not really. She would go back someday, maybe, for a visit. But this mountain, this house, this man, this was her life now. The trees opened up ahead, and Elena saw the house for the first time. It sat in a clearing on the ridge built from dark timber and stone, solid and squat against the wind. It wasn't large, but it looked sturdy, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a stone chimney rising from the center. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and gray against the sky. Behind the house, the land sloped upward, thick with pine. To the east, she could see a barn and what looked like a lumber mill, silent and still under the snow. Silas brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He climbed down without a word, lifted Elena's trunk from the back, and carried it up the porch steps. Elena followed, her legs stiff from the cold and the long ride. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. The front door opened into a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a few chairs. There was a kitchen area to one side, a staircase to the other. The walls were bare wood, unadorned, no pictures, no decorations. It was clean, but it felt empty. Functional. Silas set her trunk down by the stairs. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right." Elena blinked. "My room?" "Yes." "We're not, She stopped, her face heating. "You don't expect—" "No," Silas said bluntly. "I don't." He turned and walked toward the kitchen without looking back. Elena stood there, her trunk at her feet, and felt something crack inside her chest. She didn't know if it was relief or disappointment or just exhaustion. She picked up her trunk. It was heavier than she remembered, and carried it upstairs. Her room was small and plain, a narrow bed, a dresser, a single window that looked out over the clearing. The walls were the same bare wood as downstairs. There was a quilt on the bed, faded but clean, and a lamp on the dresser. That was all. Elena set her trunk down and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm, the quilt rough under her hands. She looked around the room, her room, apparently, and tried to imagine living here, sleeping here, waking up every morning to these walls, this silence. She thought about her old room back in Ashford Hollow, the wallpaper with the tiny blue flowers, the bookshelf her father had built for her when she was 10, the window seat where she used to sit and read on summer afternoons. She thought about the fact that none of that belonged to her anymore. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, and waited for the numbness to pass. It didn't. Dinner that night was silent. Silas made stew. Venison, potatoes, carrots, cooked in a heavy iron pot over the fire. It was plain but good, better than Elena expected. He served her a bowl without comment, then sat down across the table with his own. They ate without speaking. Elena tried to think of something to say, some way to break the silence, but everything felt wrong. "How was your day?" She'd been married to him for 6 hours. "Do you like it up here?" "Clearly, or he wouldn't live here." "What do you do all day?" He'd already told her, timber work. She'd seen the mill. So she stayed quiet and ate her stew and listened to the sound of the wind outside. When they finished, Silas took her bowl without a word and washed both in a basin by the fire. Elena stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure what to do. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Is there anything I should know?" she asked. "About the house, I mean. Rules or—" "Don't go into the locked room," Silas said without turning around. Elena frowned. "What locked room?" "Upstairs, end of the hall. It's locked. Leave it that way." "Why?" He finally looked at her, his expression flat. Because I said so. Elena's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Fine. Anything else you need to know? You'll figure out. He dried his hands on a rag and hung it over the edge of the basin. I'll be up at dawn. I work most of the day. You can do what you like as long as you stay out of the way. Stay out of the way, Elena repeated. That's right. He walked past her and headed for the stairs. Elena watched him go, her hands curling into fists at her sides. Good night, she said to his back. He didn't answer. Nas. Elena lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her small room. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. She could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the distant snap of the fire downstairs dying out. She thought about the locked room at the end of the hall. Don't go into it, Silas had said. Leave it that way. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the courtroom. Indifferent, cold, like she was an inconvenience he'd been forced to accept. She thought about the fact that he'd bought her. That was the truth of it, no matter how Hargrove had dressed it up. Her father had owed money, and Silas had paid it, and now she was here. She wondered what he'd wanted in return. If not a wife, not in any real sense, then what? The wind rattled the shutters again, and Elena pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but it didn't come. She just lay there in the dark, listening to the house and the wind and the silence, and wondered if this was what the rest of her life would feel like. The days fell into a rhythm, though it wasn't a comfortable one. Silas woke before dawn and left the house before Elena even got out of bed. She'd hear the front door close, the crunch of his boots on the snow, and then silence. He worked at the mill most of the day, cutting timber, hauling logs, whatever it was timbermen did. Elena didn't know. He didn't explain. She spent her days alone in the house, trying to find something to do. She cleaned, though the house didn't need much cleaning. She cooked, though Silas never asked her to and usually made his own meals anyway. She read the few books she'd brought with her, then read them again. She stared out the window at the endless trees and the gray sky and the snow that never seemed to stop falling. She felt like a ghost. Silas came back in the evenings, exhausted and silent. He'd wash up, eat, and then disappear upstairs to his own room. He didn't talk to her. He didn't ask her about her day. He barely looked at her. It was like she wasn't even there. At first, Elena tried to engage him. She'd ask about his work, about the mill, about the mountain. He'd answer in single syllables, fine, busy, cold, and then the conversation would die. After a few days, she stopped trying, but she couldn't stop thinking about the locked room. It was at the end of the upstairs hallway, past Silas's room and her own. The door was heavy wood with a brass lock that looked old but solid. Elena walked past it a dozen times a day, and every time she felt the pull of curiosity. What was inside? Why wouldn't Silas let her see it? She told herself it didn't matter. It was his house. He had a right to privacy, but the more she told herself that, the more the question gnawed at her. One afternoon, when Silas was at the mill and the house was empty, Elena stood in front of the locked door and tried the handle. It didn't budge. She knelt down and peered through the keyhole. She couldn't see much, just a sliver of darkness, the edge of what might have been a dresser or a desk. But there was something in there, something Silas didn't want her to see. She stood up, her heart pounding, and stepped back. Leave it alone, she told herself. It's not your business. But she didn't leave. She just stood there, staring at the door, and wondered what kind of man locked away a room in his own house. 2 weeks after the wedding, Elena was in the kitchen when she heard the sound of a horse outside. She looked out the window and saw a man dismounting in the clearing, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a rifle slung across his back. Her heart jumped. She didn't know who he was, but he moved like someone who belonged here, striding up to the porch without hesitation. She heard the front door open before she could react. "Silas!" the man called out. Elena stepped into the main room just as Silas came down the stairs. His expression didn't change, still flat, still unreadable, but something about his posture shifted. He wasn't surprised. "Caleb," Silas said. The man, Caleb, grinned. "Heard you got married. Thought I'd come to see the poor woman who agreed to put up with you." Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Caleb's eyes shifted to Elena, and his grin widened. "You must be Elena. Caleb Dunn. I'm what passes for a neighbor around here, though that's a stretch. My place is about 10 miles east." Elena managed a small smile. Nice to meet you. You too. Caleb glanced at Silas. You going to offer me a drink, or do I have to invite myself? Silas turned without a word and walked into the kitchen. Caleb followed, and Elena trailed after them, unsure what else to do. Silas poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Caleb. They sat at the table, and Elena hovered near the doorway, feeling like an intruder in her own house. So, Caleb said, taking a sip. How's married life treating you? Fine, Silas said. That's it? Just fine? That's it. Caleb shook his head, laughing. You're a real conversationalist, you know that? He looked at Elena. How about you? Settling in all right? Elena hesitated. It's different. Different. That's one word for it. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Silas is good people, even if he doesn't talk much. You'll get used to him. Elena glanced at Silas. He was staring into his glass, his expression unreadable. She wondered if that was true, if she'd ever get used to him, or if he'd ever let her close enough to try. What brings you up here? Silas asked, changing the subject. Caleb's expression shifted, losing some of its humor. Heard some things in town. Thought you should know. What things? Hargrove's been asking questions about your land, about the timber operation. Seems like he's got an interest. Silas's grip tightened on his glass. He always has an interest. This feels different, Caleb said. He's been talking to the county registrar, looking at deeds, boundary lines. I don't know what he's planning, but it's not good. Elena's stomach turned. Hargrove. Of course it came back to him. Silas set his glass down hard. He got what he wanted. Did he? Caleb glanced at Elena, then back at Silas. I'm just saying, keep your eyes open. Hargrove doesn't do anything without a reason. Silas didn't answer. He just stared at the table, his jaw tight, and Elena felt the weight of something unsaid pressing down on the room. Caleb finished his drink and stood. I should get going, but if you need anything, you know where I am. Silas nodded. Thanks. Caleb tipped his hat to Elena. Ma'am, good luck with this one. He left, and the house fell silent again. Elena watched Silas, waiting for him to say something, to explain what Caleb had meant, to tell her what Hargrove might be planning. But he just sat there, staring at his glass, lost in whatever dark thoughts he kept locked behind those cold gray eyes. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. What does he want? She asked. Silas looked up at her, surprised she was still there. Who? Hargrove. What does he want from you? That's not your concern. You keep saying that, Elena said, her voice sharper than she intended. But I'm here. I'm part of this, whether you like it or not. So what does he want? Silas stood, the chair scraping against the floor. He wants what men like him always want: power, control, land. He walked past her toward the stairs. And he'll do whatever it takes to get it. He disappeared upstairs, leaving Elena alone in the kitchen with more questions than answers. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, turning Caleb's words over in her mind. Hargrove's been asking questions about the land, about Silas, about the marriage. She thought about her father, signing away everything they had. She thought about the way Hargrove had smiled when she signed the marriage contract. He knows exactly what he's getting, Hargrove had said. What did that mean? What was this marriage really for? Elena threw back the quilt and got out of bed. She pulled on her robe and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark and quiet, but she could see a faint line of light under Silas's door. He was still awake. She walked past his room, her bare feet silent on the cold floor, and stopped in front of the locked door at the end of the hall. She didn't know why she was here. Maybe because she was tired of being kept in the dark. Maybe because she was tired of feeling like a stranger in her own life. Or maybe because she was just tired of being afraid. She tried the handle again, still locked. Looking for something? Elena spun around. Silas stood in the hallway behind her, his shirt half unbuttoned, his expression hard. She swallowed. I couldn't sleep. So you came up here to break into my room? I wasn't breaking in. I was just what? He stepped closer and Elena backed up against the door. I told you not to go in there. And I haven't, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But you can't expect me to live in this house and not wonder. Yes, I can. His voice was low, dangerous. That room is locked for a reason. You don't need to know what's in there. Why not? Because it's none of your business. I'm your wife. You're Hargrove's pawn, Silas said flatly. Same as me. Don't pretend this is anything more than what it is. The words hit harder than they should have. Elena's throat tightened, but she refused to let him see her cry. Fine, she said. Keep your secrets. Lock me out. I don't care. She pushed past him and walked back to her room, slamming the door behind her. She heard Silas stand there in the hallway for a long moment, then the creak of floorboards as he walked away. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, shaking. She didn't cry. She was too angry to cry. But she sat there in the dark, her hands curled into fists, and made herself a promise. She wasn't going to be a pawn. Not for Hargrove, not for Silas, not for anyone. If they thought she was just going to sit quietly and accept whatever they decided for her, they were wrong. Elena Mercer now, whether she liked it or not, was done being silent. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of splitting wood. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of the axe biting into timber. Crack, pause, crack, then threw back the quilt and dressed quickly. The air in her room was cold enough that she could see her breath. Downstairs, the fire had burned down to embers. She fed it fresh wood and got it going again, then put water on to boil. Through the kitchen window, she could see Silas in the clearing, working through a pile of logs with mechanical precision. His breath came out in white clouds, his movements efficient and tireless. He'd been at it for a while. There was already a sizable stack of split wood beside him. Elena made coffee and stood at the window, watching him work. She was still angry about last night, about the locked room and the way he'd spoken to her. But there was something almost hypnotic about the rhythm of his work. The way he swung the axe with complete control, never missing, never hesitating. She wondered what he was thinking. If he ever thought about anything except work and silence and whatever ghosts he kept locked away in that room. The coffee finished brewing. She poured herself a cup, then, after a moment's hesitation, poured a second. She carried both outside, her boots crunching through the fresh snow. Silas didn't look up when she approached. He just brought the axe down again, splitting another log cleanly down the center. I made coffee, Elena said. He paused mid-swing, glanced at her, then at the cup in her outstretched hand. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, but then he set the axe down and took the cup. Thanks, he said. It was the first civil word he'd spoken to her since their argument. Elena nodded and took a sip from her own cup, the steam rising into the cold air. They stood there in silence, drinking coffee while the sun climbed higher over the ridge. Finally, Silas spoke. About last night, he said, not looking at her. I shouldn't have said what I said, about you being a pawn. Elena looked at him, surprised. But you meant it. Doesn't mean I should have said it. He took another drink, then stared down into the cup. This situation isn't fair to you, I know that. It's not fair to either of us. No, Silas agreed. It's not. Elena wrapped both hands around her cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Can I ask you something? Silas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Why did you agree to this? To the marriage? Caleb said Hargrove's interested in your land, but you could have just paid him off. You didn't need to. She stopped, unsure how to finish. Didn't need to buy a wife. Silas finished for her. His voice was flat. No, I didn't. Then why? He was quiet for a long time. Elena thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he said, because Hargrove didn't give me a choice. Not a real one. What does that mean? It means he had leverage. Silas drained his cup and handed it back to her. And when men like Hargrove have leverage, you do what they say, or you lose everything. What kind of leverage? But Silas just shook his head. It doesn't matter now. It's done. He picked up the axe and went back to work. And Elena knew the conversation was over. She carried the cups back inside, frustration coiling tight in her chest. Every time she thought she might get an answer, he shut her out. But at least he'd apologized. That was something. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning, scrubbing floors, wiping down surfaces, washing dishes that were already clean. It was busy work, pointless work, but it gave her hands something to do. By noon, the house was spotless and Elena was exhausted. She made lunch, bread, cheese, dried apples, and called out to Silas. He came in, washed his hands at the basin, and sat down across from her. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, less hostile, just empty. When they finished, Silas stood and pulled on his coat. "I'll be at the mill for the rest of the day." Elena nodded. "All right." He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. "There's venison in the cold box if you want to make stew for dinner." It was a small thing, barely more than a suggestion, but it felt like an offering, a truce. "I will," Elena said. He left, and Elena was alone again. She cleaned up from lunch, then stood in the empty house, listening to the silence. It pressed in on her from all sides, heavy and suffocating. She needed to do something, anything. Her eyes drifted to the stairs. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't, but the pull was too strong. Elena climbed the stairs and walked down the hallway to the locked room. She stood in front of the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Silas had told her not to go in. He'd made it clear, but he'd also locked her out of every part of his life, and she was tired of living in the dark. She tried the handle. Still locked. But then she remembered something. A loose floorboard in the hallway, near the top of the stairs. She'd stepped on it yesterday and heard it creak. Old houses always had hiding places. Maybe Silas had left a key somewhere. Elena went back to the loose board and knelt down. She worked her fingers under the edge and pried it up carefully. Underneath, in the narrow space between the joists, was a small wooden box. Her heart pounded. She lifted the box out and opened it. Inside were three things: a tarnished brass key, a folded piece of paper, and a lock of dark hair tied with a faded blue ribbon. Elena's hands shook as she picked up the key. It was old, the brass worn smooth in places. It looked like it would fit the lock on the door at the end of the hall. She set the key aside and unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in a woman's handwriting, neat, careful, the ink faded to brown. "My dearest Silas, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. I know you will blame yourself, but you must not. What happened was no one's fault. The mountain takes what it takes, and we cannot fight it. I want you to know that the time we had together was the happiest of my life. You gave me everything, a home, a family, a future. I only wish we had more time to see it through. Take care of our girl. Tell her about me when she's old enough to understand. Tell her I loved her more than anything in this world, and that leaving her is the only thing I regret. I love you. I will always love you. Yours, Catherine." Elena read the letter twice, then a third time. Catherine. Silas had been married before, and there had been a child, our girl. But where were they now? She picked up the lock of hair and held it up to the light. It was fine and dark, a child's hair, soft. Something cold settled in Elena's stomach. She put everything back in the box except the key, then replaced the box under the floorboard. She stood, the key clutched in her hand, and walked to the locked door. She shouldn't do this. She knew she shouldn't, but she slid the key into the lock anyway and turned it. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, the room was dim. Heavy curtains covered the window, blocking out most of the light. Elena stepped inside, her eyes adjusting slowly. It was a child's room. A small bed stood against one wall, made up with a quilt covered in yellow flowers. There was a dresser with a porcelain doll sitting on top, its painted face staring blankly into the room. A rocking horse in the corner. A shelf of children's books. And on the wall above the bed, two framed photographs. Elena walked closer. The first photograph showed a woman, young, pretty, with dark hair and a gentle smile. She was standing in front of this very house, one hand resting on her swollen belly. Pregnant. The second photograph showed the same woman holding a baby. She was sitting in the rocking chair that was now downstairs by the fire, the baby wrapped in a blanket, her face glowing with happiness. And beside her, standing with one hand on her shoulder, was Silas. But it was a different Silas. Younger, softer. He was smiling in the photograph, actually smiling, and it transformed his whole face. Elena stared at the photographs, her throat tight. Catherine. The baby. They were both gone. She heard the front door open downstairs. Her heart stopped. Silas was back. She'd thought she had hours before he returned, but... Elena? His voice carried up the stairs. She heard his boots on the floor below. Elena's mind raced. She backed out of the room as quietly as she could, pulled the door shut, and locked it. She shoved the key into her pocket and hurried down the hallway just as Silas reached the top of the stairs. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing up here?" Elena's voice came out strained. "I was just coming to get something from my room." Silas's gaze flicked past her to the locked door at the end of the hall, then back to her face. His expression hardened. "Were you in that room?" "No," Elena lied. "I told you I wouldn't go in." "Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Because she had. She'd seen the ghost of the life Silas used to have, the wife and child he'd lost, the man he used to be before grief hollowed him out. "I'm fine," Elena said. I didn't expect you back so soon." Silas stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked down the stairs without another word. Elena stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, the key burning a hole in her pocket. She waited until she heard him moving around in the kitchen, then slipped into her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out the key, staring at it. She should put it back. She should forget what she'd seen, but she couldn't. Because now she understood. The silence, the coldness, the way Silas kept her at arm's length. It wasn't about her. It was about them. Catherine and the baby, the family he'd lost. And Elena was just a painful reminder of everything he didn't have anymore. She slipped the key into the back of her dresser drawer under a stack of clothes and tried to steady her breathing. She'd crossed a line, and she knew it. But there was no going back now. She just had to hope Silas wouldn't notice the key was missing. Dinner that night was tense. Silas barely looked at her, and Elena couldn't stop thinking about the photographs in that room. Every time she glanced at him, she saw the man in the picture, younger, smiling, holding his wife. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't fully understand. "Did you come back for something earlier?" Elena asked, breaking the silence. "Forgot a tool," Silas said. "Had to come back for it." Oh, he didn't elaborate. They finished eating in silence, and when Silas stood to wash the dishes, Elena stopped him. "I'll do it," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." Silas studied her for a moment, then nodded and headed upstairs. Elena washed the dishes slowly, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind spun. She needed to tell him she'd been in the room. She needed to apologize. But how could she, without admitting she'd broken his trust? She dried the last dish and set it on the shelf, then stood there staring out the window at the dark trees. The wind had picked up, and snow was starting to fall again, thick and heavy. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Silas stood in the doorway, holding something in his hands. When he stepped into the light, Elena saw what it was. The wooden box from under the floorboard. Her stomach dropped. "You took the key," Silas said. His voice was low, dangerous. Elena's throat closed. "Silas, you went in that room." It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly. "I shouldn't have, I know, but what?" Silas's hands clenched around the box. "You couldn't help yourself? You had to know?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I had to know, because you won't tell me anything. You won't let me in. I'm living in this house with a stranger, and I don't know anything about you except that you're angry, and you lock me out of everything, and I'm tired of it. So you broke into a room I specifically told you not to enter." "I found a letter," Elena said, "from Catherine. I know you were married before. I know you had a daughter." Silas went very still. The color drained from his face. "What happened to them?" Elena asked quietly. "Get out. Silas, get out." His voice cracked. "Go upstairs. Now." Elena's eyes burned, but she held her ground. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what happened." Silas slammed the box down on the table hard enough to make the dishes rattle. "You want to know what happened? Fine. They died. Catherine and my daughter. They both died, and it was my fault, and I don't want to talk about it. Ever. Is that clear enough for you?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena stared at him, her chest tight. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "You don't know that." "The letter," Catherine said it wasn't. "Catherine is dead," Silas shouted. His voice echoed through the house, raw and broken. "She's dead. And so is my daughter, and nothing you say is going to change that. Elena flinched, but she didn't back down. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But keeping that room locked, keeping me out, it's not going to bring them back. I know that, Silas said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. I know that better than anyone. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the box on the table. Elena heard him go out the front door, heard it slam behind him. Then silence. She stood there for a long time, her hands shaking, tears sliding down her cheeks. She'd pushed too hard. She knew that now. But she'd also seen something in Silas's face when he shouted, not just anger, but pain, raw, unhealed pain that he'd been carrying alone for too long. Elena wiped her eyes and picked up the box. She carried it upstairs and knocked on Silas's door. No answer. She tried the handle, unlocked. She pushed it open. The room was empty. Silas hadn't come back inside yet. Elena set the box on his dresser, then hesitated. She walked to the end of the hall, unlocked the child's room, and stepped inside. In the darkness, with only the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, the room felt like a shrine. Everything frozen in time, untouched, waiting for someone who would never come home. Elena walked to the dresser and picked up the porcelain doll. Its dress was faded but clean, carefully preserved. She set it back down and looked at the photographs on the wall. Catherine's smile, the baby's tiny face, Silas looking happy in a way Elena couldn't imagine him now. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry. She left the room and locked it behind her, then went to her own room and lay down on the bed. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, listening to the wind and waiting for Silas to come back. He didn't return until well after midnight. Elena heard the front door open, heard his slow, heavy footsteps on the stairs. He paused outside her door. She could see the shadow of his boots under the crack, then moved on to his own room. The house fell silent again. Elena closed her eyes and pulled the quilt over her head, but it didn't block out the cold. The next few days were worse than the silence that came before. Silas avoided her completely. He left before she woke up and didn't come back until after dark. When he did come back, he went straight to his room without a word. He didn't make dinner. He didn't wash up in the kitchen. It was like he was trying to pretend she didn't exist. Elena tried to give him space, but the isolation was crushing. She had no one to talk to, nothing to do except wander the empty house and stare out at the endless snow. She thought about leaving, packing her trunk and walking back down the mountain, consequences be damned. But where would she go? Her family's house was only standing because of this marriage. If she left, it would all fall apart. She was trapped, same as Silas. On the fourth day, Caleb came back. Elena heard his horse outside and felt a rush of relief so strong it nearly knocked her over. She opened the door before he could knock. Caleb, she said, trying not to sound as desperate as she felt. Come in. Caleb stepped inside, stomping snow off his boots. Afternoon, Elena? Silas around? He's at the mill. Mind if I wait? Please do. Elena gestured toward the fire. Can I get you something? Coffee? Food? Coffee would be good. Caleb settled into a chair by the fire and looked at her closely. You all right? I'm fine. You don't look fine. Elena busied herself making coffee, her hands unsteady. It's just quiet up here. Quiet's one word for it. Caleb accepted the cup she handed him and took a sip. Lonely's another. Elena sat down across from him, grateful for the company even if it was just for a little while. How long have you known Silas? About 8 years. We worked together on a timber crew down south before he moved up here. He's a good man, Elena. I know he doesn't make it easy to see that, but he is. He's angry, Elena said quietly. He's grieving, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. You knew Catherine? Caleb's expression softened. I did. She was good for him. Made him smile, which is no small feat. And the baby, he stopped, his jaw tightening. What happened to them? It broke something in Silas. He hasn't been the same since. What did happen? Caleb hesitated. That's his story to tell, not mine. He won't tell me anything. Then maybe you need to stop asking and start listening. Elena frowned. What does that mean? It means Silas doesn't talk much, but when he does, it matters. Pay attention to what he does say. The rest will come when he's ready. Caleb finished his coffee and stood. I should get going. Tell him I stopped by. Wait, Elena said. You said Hargrove's been asking about the land. What do you think he's planning? Caleb's expression darkened. I don't know yet. But Hargrove doesn't do anything without a reason, and when a man like him starts digging into property records, it usually means he's found a way to take something that doesn't belong to him. He paused at the door. Keep your eyes open, Elena. And if anything feels wrong, you let me know. He left, and Elena stood alone in the empty house again. But this time, Caleb's words stayed with her. Pay attention to what he does say. She thought about Silas saying Hargrove had leverage. She thought about the marriage contract she'd signed without reading carefully. She thought about the locked room and the letter from Catherine and the way Silas had said, "It was my fault." Something wasn't adding up. There were pieces missing, and Elena needed to find them. She went upstairs to her room and pulled out the trunk she'd brought from Ashford Hollow. At the bottom, underneath her clothes, was a small leather portfolio, papers her father had given her the morning of the wedding. She'd barely glanced at them, too numb to care. Now, she spread them out on her bed and started reading. There was the marriage contract, dense legal language that hurt her head to parse. But as she read more carefully, certain phrases jumped out. Transfer of title upon fulfillment of conditions. Joint ownership contingent on occupancy and improvements. Reversion clause in the event of dissolution or abandonment. Elena's hands went cold. This wasn't just a marriage contract, it was a land transfer agreement. If she and Silas stayed married and lived on Iron Pine Ridge for 2 years, the land would be jointly owned. But if either of them left, or if the marriage dissolved, ownership reverted to... She flipped to the next page, her heart pounding. Reversion to primary creditor, Victor Hargrove, First Bank of Ashford Hollow. Elena sat back, the papers falling from her hands. Hargrove didn't just arrange this marriage out of kindness or business. He set it up so that no matter what happened, he'd win. If she and Silas made it work, they'd be bound to the land and to him. If they didn't, he'd get the property outright. It was a trap, and they'd both walked into it. She had to tell Silas. Elena grabbed the papers and ran downstairs, out into the cold. She didn't bother with a coat. She just ran toward the mill, her breath coming in white clouds, her boots slipping on the icy path. The mill was a large wooden structure built over a creek, the water wheel frozen solid for the winter. Inside, she could hear the sound of sawing. She pushed through the door and found Silas working at a long bench, planing a piece of timber with methodical precision. "Silas," she said, breathless. He looked up, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I need to show you something." She held out the papers. "The marriage contract. Did you read it? All of it?" His expression darkened. "What about it?" "It's not just a marriage contract. It's a land transfer. If we stay married for 2 years, the land becomes jointly owned. But if we don't, Hargrove gets everything." Silas set down the plane and took the papers from her. He read through them slowly, his face growing harder with each line. When he finished, he looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "He trapped us," Elena said. "Both of us. He arranged this whole thing so that either way, he wins." Silas crumpled the papers in his fist. "That son of a "There's more," Elena said. "The contract says we have to live here and make improvements to the property. If we don't, he can claim abandonment and take the land immediately. That's why he's been watching. That's why Caleb said he's been asking questions. He's waiting for us to fail." Silas turned away, his hands braced on the workbench. "I should have known. I should have read it more carefully. It's not your fault. The language is deliberately confusing. He wanted us to miss it." "Why?" Silas's voice was rough. "Why go to all this trouble? He could have just foreclosed on the land." "Maybe he couldn't," Elena said slowly. "Maybe there's something about the land he needs that requires legal ownership, something he can't get through foreclosure alone." Silas looked at her, and she saw the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "The timber rights," he said. "When I bought this land, I made sure the timber rights were separate from the property deed. They're registered in my name alone. Hargrove can't access them without my signature." "So he needs you to default on the marriage contract," Elena said. "That way, when the land reverts to him, he can argue that the timber rights transfer with it." "But he can't just wait 2 years for that," Silas said. "He needs the timber now, which means he's going to try to force us to fail," Elena finished. They stared at each other, the weight of the realization settling between them. We need to see the original deed, Silas said finally. The one that established the timber rights. If Hargrove's been tampering with records, there might be discrepancies. Where would it be? County Registrar's office, in Ashford Hollow. Elena's stomach tightened. She hadn't been back to town since the wedding. She wasn't sure she could face it. Her father's shame, her mother's silence, the looks from people who knew what had happened. But they didn't have a choice. We'll go tomorrow, Silas said. First thing. Elena nodded. Then, before she could stop herself, she said, I'm sorry. About the room. About Catherine. I shouldn't have... No, Silas interrupted. You were right. I've been locked up in that grief for too long. He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something other than coldness there. Catherine told me not to blame myself, but I did anyway. The mine collapsed because I pushed for them to dig deeper. I wanted more timber access, more profit, and it cost them everything. It was an accident, Elena said softly. Catherine knew that. Maybe. Silas's voice was rough. But knowing that doesn't make it easier. They stood there in the cold mill, the creek frozen beneath them, and Elena felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, not understanding, but maybe the beginning of something that could become those things, given time. We should get back, Silas said finally. It's getting dark. They walked back to the house together, side by side, and for the first time since Elena had arrived on Iron Pine Ridge, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a truce. They left for Ashford Hollow before dawn, the wagon rattling down the mountain road in the thin gray light. Elena sat beside Silas, wrapped in a wool blanket against the cold, watching the trees blur past. Neither of them had slept much. They'd spent half the night going through every paper Silas had related to the property, deeds, receipts, timber contracts, looking for anything that might help them understand what Hargrove was really after. What they'd found wasn't encouraging. The original deed was clean, the timber rights clearly separated from the land ownership. But there were amendments filed years later, after Catherine's death, when Silas had needed money for medical bills and funeral costs. Small loans, all through Hargrove's bank, all secured against the property in ways Silas hadn't fully understood at the time. He's been setting this up for years, Silas had said, staring at the documents spread across the kitchen table. Slowly, piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. And the right moment had been Elena, a desperate father with debts he couldn't pay, a daughter with no options, and a widower who could be pressured into accepting an arrangement that looked like help, but was really a noose. Now, as the wagon descended toward town, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something worse than they realized. What if the records have been changed? She asked. At the county office, what if Hargrove's already altered them? Then we'll know he's committed fraud, Silas said. That's a federal crime. Even Hargrove can't buy his way out of that. Can't he? Silas didn't answer. They both knew men like Hargrove usually could. Ashford Hollow looked smaller than Elena remembered. The buildings hunched against the cold, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray streams. The streets were mostly empty this early, just a few people hurrying between shops with their heads down. Elena pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to make herself smaller. She didn't want to be recognized, didn't want to see the pity or judgment in people's eyes. Silas brought the wagon to a stop in front of the county courthouse, a square brick building that housed the registrar's office on the first floor. He climbed down and offered Elena his hand. She took it, grateful for the steadiness of his grip. Inside the building was warmer, but not by much. Their footsteps echoed on the tile floor as they walked down the hallway to the registrar's office. The door was open, and behind a cluttered desk sat a thin, balding man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Help you?" he asked without looking up from his ledger. "We need to see property records," Silas said. "Iron Pine Ridge, Parcel 17, Section 4. The registrar glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly when he saw Silas. "That your land?" "It is." "ID?" Silas pulled out a worn leather wallet and showed his identification papers. The registrar studied them, then nodded and stood. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room. Elena and Silas stood in silence, the clock on the wall ticking loudly. Elena's heart was pounding. She didn't know what they'd find, but she knew it wouldn't be good. The registrar returned carrying a thick file folder. He set it on the desk and opened it, revealing a stack of documents. Original deed, amendments, liens, transfers. Everything's here. Silas leaned over the desk, his eyes scanning the papers. Elena stood beside him, trying to follow along. At first, everything looked normal. The original purchase from 1867, the timber rights separation in 1869, the marriage to Catherine recorded in 1871. Then Silas's finger stopped on a document dated 3 months ago. "What's this?" he asked. The registrar adjusted his spectacles and peered at the paper. "Looks like a lien, filed by First Bank of Ashford Hollow. Standard procedure when there's outstanding debt." "I paid off that debt," Silas said, his voice hard. 2 years ago." "According to this, you didn't." The registrar tapped the document. "Says here you still owe $4,000. "That's a lie." The registrar bristled. "I don't deal in lies, Mr. Mercer. I record what's filed with this office. If you have a problem with the lien, take it up with the bank." "I want copies of everything in that file," Silas said. "Every document." "That'll cost you." "I don't care what it costs." The registrar sighed and started pulling documents out of the file. As he worked, Elena noticed another paper near the bottom of the stack, a transfer deed dated just 2 weeks ago. She pulled it out carefully. Silas, she said quietly. He looked at the document she was holding, and his face went white. It was a conditional transfer deed signed by Hargrove and witnessed by someone named J. Brennan, transferring ownership of Iron Pine Ridge to the First Bank of Ashford Hollow pending fulfillment of contract terms. "He already filed it," Elena whispered. "He's already claiming the land." "That's not legal," Silas said. The contract says 2 years. It's only been 3 weeks. Legal or not, he filed it. Elena's hands were shaking. If he can convince a judge that we abandoned the property or violated the terms somehow, we haven't abandoned anything. But who's going to believe us over him? The registrar finished making copies and slid them across the desk. Silas paid without counting the money, then gathered up the papers. "Is there anything else filed under my name? Any other claims or liens?" The registrar checked his ledger. "Just what's in the file. Why?" "No reason." Silas turned to leave, then stopped. "Who's J. Brennan?" "Junior clerk at the bank," the registrar said. "Why?" "Just curious." They left the courthouse and stood on the street, the cold wind cutting through their coats. Elena could see the bank from here, a large brick building on Main Street, Hargrove's name etched into a brass plaque beside the door. "We need to confront him," Elena said. "No," Silas said immediately. "We need to get back to the ridge and figure out what he's really planning. Walking into his bank is exactly what he wants us to do." "Then what do we do?" Well, a voice said behind them, "if it isn't the happy couple." Elena turned. Victor Hargrove stood on the courthouse steps, dressed in an expensive wool coat, his silver-streaked hair perfectly combed. He was smiling, but there was nothing warm about it. "Mr. Hargrove," Silas said, his voice flat. "Out for a morning stroll?" Hargrove descended the steps slowly, his eyes moving between them. "Or perhaps checking on some paperwork." "That's our business." Of course. Hargrove stopped a few feet away. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see you in town, Mrs. Mercer. I thought you'd be busy settling into your new home." Elena forced herself to meet his eyes. "We needed to take care of some things." "I see." Hargrove's gaze shifted to the papers in Silas's hand. "Find what you were looking for?" "We found plenty," Silas said. Good. It's always important to understand the terms of one's agreements." Hargrove's smile widened slightly. "Speaking of which, I hope you're both aware of the occupancy requirements in your contract. Continuous residence, improvements to the property, maintenance of existing structures, all very clearly spelled out." "We're aware," Silas said. "Excellent, because it would be a shame if there were any misunderstandings. These contracts can be so complex, and the consequences of breach are rather severe." Hargrove pulled on his gloves, taking his time. "Well, I won't keep you. I'm sure you're eager to get back to the ridge. Weather's supposed to turn bad tonight. Wouldn't want to get caught on the road in a storm." He tipped his hat and walked past them toward the bank. Elena watched him go, her stomach churning. "He knows we found the transfer deed," she said. He wanted us to find it. Yes, Silas agreed. He's trying to scare us. It's working. Silas looked at her, and something in his expression softened. We're not beaten yet. Come on. We need to talk to someone. They walked 2 blocks down Main Street to a small office with a sign that read, Brennan and Sons, Legal Services. Silas pushed open the door without knocking. Inside, a young man sat at a desk covered with papers. He looked up, startled, then stood quickly when he saw Silas. Mr. Mercer, he said, I wasn't expecting— You witnessed a transfer deed for Hargrove, Silas said, cutting him off. 2 weeks ago. Why? The young man, this must be Jay Brennan, went pale. That's confidential client business. The hell it is. You witnessed a fraudulent document claiming ownership of my land. It's not fraudulent if it's filed properly. It's fraudulent if the conditions haven't been met. Silas stepped closer. Did Hargrove tell you the contract requires 2 years of occupancy before transfer? Did he mention that part when he had you witness it? Brennan swallowed hard. He said all the conditions had been satisfied. He lied. I can't. Brennan looked between Silas and Elena, panic clear on his face. Look, I just witnessed the signature. I didn't know there were problems with the contract. But you work for him, Elena said. At the bank? You must have known something wasn't right. Brennan hesitated, then sank back into his chair. He looked young, Elena realized. Maybe 25. And terrified. Hargrove's been filing a lot of these transfer deeds lately, he said quietly. Properties all over the county, farms, businesses, land, all through his bank, all claiming default or breach of contract. I asked about it once, and he told me to mind my own business if I wanted to keep my job. How many properties? Silas asked. At least a dozen, maybe more. Elena and Silas exchanged a look. This wasn't just about Iron Pine Ridge. Hargrove was systematically taking over land throughout the county, using debt and legal manipulation to force people out. Do you have records? Silas asked. Of the other properties? At the bank, but I can't just hand them over. Hargrove's breaking the law, Elena said. If you help us prove it, you won't be in trouble. But if you don't, and this goes to federal authorities, you'll be considered an accomplice. Brennan's hands shook. I could lose everything. You'll lose more if you don't help, Silas said. We're not the only people he's done this to. There are families who've lost their homes, their livelihoods. You really want to be part of that? Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and grabbed his coat. I'll get you the records, but not from the bank. Hargrove keeps copies at his house. I deliver documents there sometimes. I know where he keeps his files. When can you get them? Silas asked. Tonight. He's attending some dinner at the mayor's house. He'll be gone for hours. Bring them to Iron Pine Ridge, Silas said, as soon as you have them. Brennan nodded, his face set. I'll be there. They left the office and climbed back into the wagon. As Silas guided the horses out of town, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. For better or worse, they were committed now. The ride back up the mountain was tense. Dark clouds were rolling in from the west, heavy and low, and the wind had picked up. Silas kept the horses moving at a steady pace, his jaw tight. Do you trust him? Elena asked. Brennan? No, Silas said, but I don't think we have a choice. What if he tells Hargrove what we're planning? Then we'll deal with it. Elena pulled the blanket tighter. The temperature was dropping fast, and the first snowflakes were starting to fall. By the time they reached the ridge, the snow was coming down thick and heavy, reducing visibility to just a few yards. Silas got the horses into the barn and unhitched the wagon, while Elena ran inside to start the fire. Her hands were numb, her face stinging from the cold. She got the fire going and put water on to heat, then stood by the window watching the snow pile up outside. This was bad. If Brennan was coming tonight, he'd have to travel through this storm. And if Hargrove found out what they were planning— The front door opened and Silas came in covered in snow. He shook it off and stood by the fire, warming his hands. Storm's getting worse, he said. If Brennan's smart, he'll wait until morning. What if he doesn't? Then he's a fool. Silas looked at her. But if he does come, we need to be ready. If those records prove what we think they do, Hargrove's going to know we have them, and he won't let that stand. What do you mean? I mean, he'll come for us, Silas said bluntly. He'll try to force us off this land one way or another. We need to be prepared for that. Elena's stomach tightened. You think he'd use violence? I think men like Hargrove don't get where they are by playing fair. He's been building this scheme for years. He's not going to let it fall apart without a fight. Silas went upstairs and returned a few minutes later carrying a rifle and a shotgun. He set them on the table and started checking them, his movements practiced and efficient. Elena stared at the guns. Silas, I'm not looking for a fight, he said. But if one comes to us, I'm not going to stand here unarmed. This is insane. We should go to the authorities. The sheriff's in Hargrove's pocket, same as half the county. Silas loaded shells into the shotgun with quick, precise movements. The only way we stop this is with proof. Real, undeniable proof that Hargrove's been defrauding people. Once we have that, we can take it to the federal marshal. But until then, we're on our own. Elena sat down at this table, her legs suddenly weak. This had escalated so fast. 2 days ago, her biggest concern was the silence and isolation. Now they were preparing for armed conflict in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm sorry, Silas said quietly. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Neither is being trapped in a fraudulent marriage, Elena said. But here we are. Silas almost smiled. Here we are. They ate a quiet dinner as the storm raged outside, the wind howling around the corners of the house. Elena kept glancing at the window, watching for any sign of movement in the darkness. But there was nothing except snow and wind and the endless night. By midnight, Brennan still hadn't arrived. Elena dozed in a chair by the fire, too anxious to sleep properly. Silas sat at the table, the shotgun within arm's reach, watching the door. Then around 2 in the morning, they heard it, the faint sound of a horse outside. Silas was on his feet instantly, the shotgun in his hands. Stay back, he told Elena. He moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. Elena held her breath, her heart pounding. After a moment, Silas lowered the gun slightly. It's him, he said. Alone. He opened the door. Brennan stumbled inside, half frozen, clutching a leather satchel to his chest. His face was white, his lips blue. I got them, he gasped. I got the records. Silas pulled him inside and slammed the door against the wind. Elena helped Brennan to the fire, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the satchel. What happened? Silas asked. Hargrove came back early, Brennan said, his teeth chattering. From the dinner. I was in his study when I heard him come in. I barely got out through the back window. I don't know if he saw me, but he knows someone was there, Silas finished. Brennan nodded. I'm sorry. I tried to be careful, but it's fine. You made it here. That's what matters. Silas took the satchel and set it on the table. What's in here? Everything, Brennan said. Property records, falsified loan documents, forged signatures. He's been doing this for at least 5 years. There are dozens of properties, farms, businesses, even the old Morrison place that burned down last year. Hargrove owned the land underneath it. I think he had someone set the fire so he could claim insurance and resell the lot. Elena felt sick. How many people has he done this to? I counted at least 30 families, maybe more. Brennan's voice was hollow. I knew he was aggressive with loans, but I didn't realize the scope of it until I saw all the files together. He's been systematically taking over the county, piece by piece. Anyone who couldn't pay, he forced out. Silas spread the documents across the table, his face grim. There were ledgers showing falsified debts, contracts with impossible terms buried in legal language, forged signatures on transfer deeds. It was all there, documented in Hargrove's own hand. This is enough, Silas said. More than enough. We can take this to the federal marshal and... The sound of horses cut him off. Multiple horses, moving fast. Silas grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window. Elena's blood went cold. She looked at Brennan, whose face had gone from white to gray. He followed me, Brennan whispered. He must have followed me, Silas cursed. How many horses did you hear? I don't know. 3? 4? Stay away from the windows, Silas ordered. He checked the shotgun again, then picked up the rifle and handed it to Elena. Do you know how to use this? No, Elena said, her voice shaking. Point and pull the trigger. Don't aim at anything you don't intend to kill. The horses stopped outside. Elena heard men's voices, low and rough. Then someone pounded on the door. "Mercer!" a voice shouted. It wasn't Hargrove. Someone rougher, hired muscle. "Open up! We know Brennan's in there!" Silas didn't move. He stood by the window, the shotgun ready. "We just want to talk," the voice continued. "Nobody needs to get hurt." "Like hell they just want to talk," Brennan whispered. The pounding came again, harder this time. "I'm giving you 10 seconds, Mercer, then we're coming in." Elena's hands tightened on the rifle. She'd never fired a gun in her life. The weight of it was wrong, foreign, but she held on because letting go felt worse. 5 seconds. Silas looked at Elena. "Whatever happens, stay down. Understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Time's up." The door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, both carrying rifles. Silas fired once, the shotgun blast deafening in the small room, and one of the men went down screaming, clutching his shoulder. The second man swung his rifle towards Silas, but Elena raised her own gun and pulled the trigger without thinking. The recoil knocked her backward. The shot went wide, shattering the window behind the man. But it was enough to make him dive for cover. Silas pumped the shotgun and fired again, this time through the open doorway. Outside, someone cursed. "Get back!" Silas shouted at the doorway. "Next one who comes through gets worse." There was a moment of silence. Then Hargrove's voice, calm and cold. "This doesn't have to end badly, Mercer. Just give me Brennan and the documents, and we'll leave." "Not a chance," Silas called back. "Then you're all dead. My men will burn this house to the ground with you inside it." Elena's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle. The man Silas had shot was groaning on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The other man had retreated outside, but she could see shadows moving in the darkness beyond the shattered doorway. "We need to get out of here," Brennan said frantically. "We can't." "Shut up," Silas said. He was scanning the room, his mind working. "Back door. Through the kitchen. We can get to the barn, take the horses, head for Caleb's place." "They'll cut us down before we get 10 feet, Elena said. "Not if we give them something else to focus on." Silas grabbed the oil lamp from the table and handed it to Brennan. "When I say go, you throw this as far out the front door as you can. Then we run for the back. Understand?" Brennan nodded, his face pale. "Elena, you go first. Don't stop, don't look back. Just run for the barn." "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be right behind you." He looked at her, and something in his eyes made her throat tight. "You can do this." Elena nodded. She set the rifle down and moved toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Silas cock the shotgun again. "Now!" Silas shouted. Brennan hurled the oil lamp through the doorway. It shattered on the porch, and flames roared up instantly, catching on the dry wood. Men shouted outside. Silas fired twice more into the chaos, then grabbed Elena's arm and shoved her toward the back door. "Go!" Elena ran. The cold hit her like a punch, but she didn't stop. She could hear Brennan behind her, his breathing ragged, and then Silas's boots pounding through the snow. The barn was 50 yards away, dark and solid against the white. A gunshot cracked behind them. Then another. Elena didn't turn around. She just ran, her lungs burning, her feet slipping on the ice. They made it to the barn. Silas yanked the door open and pushed Elena inside, then turned back with the shotgun raised. "Get the horses ready!" Elena stumbled into the darkness, her hands fumbling for the harnesses. The horses were stamping nervously, sensing the danger. She got one unhitched, and then another, her fingers numb and clumsy. "Silas!" Brennan shouted. Elena turned. Through the barn door, she could see figures running through the snow. 4 men, maybe 5. And behind them, the house. Her home for 3 weeks. The place where she'd been so desperately lonely was burning, flames licking up the walls, black smoke pouring into the night sky. Silas fired once, dropping one of the approaching men. Then he backed into the barn and slammed the door, throwing the bar across to lock it. "We can't hold here long," he said. "Mount up. We ride for Caleb's." They climbed onto the horses, Elena pulling herself up clumsily, her hands shaking. Silas kicked open the back door of the barn, the one that faced away from the house, toward the forest, and they rode out into the storm. The snow was coming down in sheets now, thick enough that Elena could barely see more than a few feet ahead. She clung to the horse's mane, trusting it to follow Silas's mount. Behind them, she heard shouting, more gunshots. But they were getting farther away, swallowed by the darkness and the storm. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. The cold was brutal, seeping through Elena's clothes, turning her fingers and toes numb. Beside her, Brennan was barely staying on his horse, swaying dangerously in the saddle. Finally, Silas slowed. "There," he said, pointing. Through the snow, Elena could just make out a light. A cabin, small and solid, with smoke rising from the chimney. Caleb's place. They rode up to the door and Silas pounded on it. "Caleb, open up!" The door flew open. Caleb stood there, fully dressed despite the late hour, a rifle in his hands. His eyes went wide when he saw them. "What in the hell?" "Hargrove," Silas said. "He came for us, tried to burn us out." Caleb stepped back, letting them inside. The cabin was warm, blessedly warm. Elena slid off her horse and nearly collapsed, but Caleb caught her arm. "Easy," he said. "Get by the fire. All of you." They stumbled inside. Caleb shut the door and barred it, then turned to face them. "Start talking." Silas told him everything, the documents, the fraudulent transfer deed, Brennan's break-in, the attack. As he spoke, Caleb's expression grew darker. "How bad is the house?" he asked. "Bad," Silas said. "Maybe gone completely by now." Caleb cursed. "And you've got proof? Real proof?" Brennan held up the satchel, still somehow clutched in his frozen hands. "Everything's here. Then we need to get it to the federal marshal. Tonight." "How?" Elena asked. "Hargrove's men will be watching the roads." "Not all of them." Caleb grabbed his coat. "There's a back trail that leads down to the valley. Rough riding, but it'll get us to the telegraph office in Millerton. We can wire the marshal's office from there, tell them to send someone immediately." "You're coming with us?" Silas asked. "Damn right I am." Caleb checked his rifle. "I've been watching Hargrove operate for years, waiting for someone to stand up to him. You just did. I'm not letting you face this alone." He looked at Elena, then at Brennan. "You two stay here. Keep the fire going. Keep the doors locked. We'll be back before dawn." "No," Elena said. "I'm coming." "Elena," Silas started. "I'm coming," she repeated, her voice hard. "That man destroyed my family, forced me into this marriage, and just tried to kill us. I'm not sitting here while you two ride off. I'm seeing this through." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right." "I'm staying," Brennan said quickly. "I've done my part. I'll guard the documents." "Fair enough." Caleb handed him a pistol. "Anyone comes through that door who isn't one of us, you shoot first and ask questions later." Brennan nodded, his face pale but set. They mounted fresh horses from Caleb's barn and rode out into the storm. The back trail was everything Caleb had promised, narrow, steep, treacherous. The horses picked their way carefully through the darkness, their hooves slipping on ice. Elena clung to her mount, every muscle screaming with exhaustion, but she refused to stop, refused to give up. Behind them, somewhere up on the ridge, her home was burning, and ahead of them, in the darkness, was the only chance they had to make sure Hargrove paid for everything he'd done. The trail seemed endless. The snow kept falling, the wind kept howling, and Elena lost all sense of time. She just followed Caleb's horse, trusting him to lead them through. Beside her, Silas rode in grim silence, his face set like stone. After what might have been an hour or 3, the trail finally leveled out. They were in the valley now, the worst of the storm behind them. Caleb pushed the horses faster, and they cantered through the darkness until lights appeared ahead. Millerton, a small town Elena had never been to. They rode straight to the telegraph office, a tiny building next to the train station. Caleb pounded on the door until a sleepy clerk opened it. "We need to send an urgent wire," Caleb said. "Federal Marshal's office. Now." The clerk blinked at them. 3 people covered in snow, clearly desperate. "It's 3 a.m. Caleb pulled out money and slapped it on the counter. "Now." The clerk swallowed and nodded, moving to the telegraph machine. "What's the message?" Caleb dictated quickly. "Federal Marshal's office, Helena District. Urgent assistance required. Multiple acts of fraud, arson, and attempted murder by Victor Hargrove, First Bank of Ashford Hollow. Evidence secured. Request immediate dispatch of federal agents. Reply to Millerton Telegraph Office." The clerk's hands flew over the keys, tapping out the message in quick bursts. When he finished, he looked up. "It'll take a few hours for a response." "We'll wait," Caleb said. They sat in the telegraph office as dawn broke over the valley, three exhausted people who'd just bet everything on the hope that justice still meant something. Elena's eyes burned with tiredness, but she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the house burning, about Hargrove's cold voice promising death, about the way Silas had shoved her toward the barn and told her to run. She looked at him now. He sat slumped in a chair, his eyes closed, but she knew he wasn't asleep. His hand rested on the rifle across his lap, ready. "Thank you," she said quietly. He opened his eyes. "For what?" "For not giving up, for fighting back." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I spent 2 years hiding up on that mountain, telling myself it was easier to just accept things as they were, that fighting would only make it worse." He looked at her. "You showed me I was wrong. I didn't do anything. You kept asking questions. You refused to stay silent. That takes courage." He reached over and took her hand. His skin was rough and cold, but solid, real. "Whatever happens next, we face it together, all right?" Elena nodded, her throat tight. "All right." The telegraph machine suddenly clattered to life. The clerk jumped, then read the incoming message. "It's from the marshal's office," he said. "They're dispatching agents immediately. Should arrive in Ashford Hollow by this evening. They're instructing you to secure all evidence and remain in protective custody until they arrive." Caleb let out a long breath. "We did it." "Not yet," Silas said. "We still need to get those documents, and we need to make sure Hargrove doesn't destroy any evidence before the marshals get there." "Then we go back," Elena said. "To your place, Caleb. We get Brennan and the documents, and we wait for the marshals." "Hargrove's going to know we wired the authorities," Caleb warned. "He's not going to go quietly." "I don't expect him to," Silas said. "But we've come this far. We're not stopping now." They rode back toward Caleb's cabin as the sun climbed higher, burning off some of the storm clouds. The snow had stopped, but the damage was done. Drifts 3 feet deep in places. The roads nearly impassable. It took them twice as long to get back, and by the time Caleb's cabin came into view, it was almost noon. Something was wrong. The door was open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Silas spurred his horse forward, the rifle already raised. Elena and Caleb followed, her heart in her throat. They found Brennan inside, unconscious on the floor, blood matting his hair. The satchel was gone. Caleb knelt beside Brennan, checking his pulse. "He's alive. Barely." "The documents," Elena said, looking around frantically. "They took them." "Not all of them," Silas said. He was standing by the fireplace, pulling something from behind a loose stone. "I told Brennan to hide copies, just in case." He held up a stack of papers, carefully folded and wrapped in oilcloth. "This is enough. Enough to prove what Hargrove's been doing." "But Hargrove has the originals," Elena said. "He can destroy them." "He can try," Silas said grimly. "But the federal marshals are coming, and when they get here, we're going to make sure he answers for every single thing he's done." Caleb got Brennan onto a bed and bandaged his head wound. The young man came around slowly, groaning. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "They came. I tried to fight, but there were too many." "You did fine," Caleb said. "Rest now." They spent the rest of the day waiting, tense and exhausted. Silas cleaned the guns. Elena made food that nobody ate. Caleb kept watch at the window. The sun moved across the sky, achingly slow. Finally, as evening shadows stretched across the valley, they heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving deliberately. Caleb raised his rifle. This is it. But when the riders came into view, they weren't Hargrove's men. They wore federal badges and carried themselves with the authority of law. 3 men, hard-faced and professional. The lead marshal dismounted and approached the cabin. "I'm Marshal Grant. We received word of serious crimes being committed in this county. I understand you have evidence?" Silas stepped forward and handed him the papers. "Everything you need is here. Fraud, extortion, arson, attempted murder. All committed by Victor Hargrove." Marshal Grant examined the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up. "This is substantial, more than substantial. Where's Hargrove now?" "Probably back in Ashford Hollow," Caleb said. "At his bank or his house?" "Then that's where we're going." Grant turned to his men. "Get ready to ride. and someone get word to the local sheriff that we're taking over this investigation." "The sheriff works for Hargrove," Silas said. Grant's smile was cold. "Not anymore, he doesn't." They rode into Ashford Hollow as night fell. A small army, the three marshals, Silas, Elena, and Caleb, all armed and determined. The town seemed to sense something had changed. People stopped on the streets to watch them pass, whispering. They went straight to Hargrove's house, a large Victorian on the edge of town. The marshals surrounded it while Grant pounded on the door. "Victor Hargrove, federal marshals, open this door." For a long moment there was nothing. Then the door opened and Hargrove stood there, dressed for dinner, calm as ever. "Gentlemen," he said, "to what do I owe this visit?" "Victor Hargrove, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, arson, and attempted murder." Grant pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to—" Hargrove ran. He bolted back into the house, and the marshals went after him. There was shouting, the crash of furniture. Silas moved toward the door, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Let them handle it," she said. They waited. After a few minutes, the marshals emerged, dragging Hargrove between them. His perfect composure was gone. His face was red, his hair disheveled, and for the first time Elena saw fear in his eyes. "This is a mistake," he shouted. "I'm a respected businessman. You can't just—" "We can, and we are," Grant said. He looked at Silas and Elena. "We'll need your full statements, and any additional evidence you can provide." "You'll have it," Silas said. They watched as the marshals hauled Hargrove away. Around them people were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion. Elena saw her father in the crowd, his face pale and shocked. Their eyes met for a brief second, then he looked away. She didn't feel anything. No anger, no grief, just a strange sense of distance, like she was watching someone else's life from far away. Caleb clapped Silas on the shoulder. "It's over. You did it." "We did it," Silas corrected. He looked at Elena. "All of us." But Elena wasn't sure it was over. Not really. Hargrove was arrested, yes, but the house on Iron Pine Ridge was burned. Everything they'd built, or tried to build, was gone. And she didn't know what came next. She didn't know if there was anything left to save. The federal investigation moved faster than Elena expected. Within 3 days, Marshal Grant and his team had torn through Hargrove's records like wolves through winter-starved sheep. They found everything. Falsified loan documents going back 7 years, forged signatures on dozens of property transfers, evidence of bribery involving the county sheriff and 2 judges, and a meticulous ledger tracking every piece of land Hargrove had stolen. The man had been so confident in his power that he'd documented his own crimes in neat, careful handwriting. Elena spent those 3 days in a boarding house in Ashford Hollow, giving statements, signing affidavits, and trying not to think about the house on Iron Pine Ridge. Silas had ridden back up the mountain the morning after Hargrove's arrest to assess the damage. He'd returned that evening with ash on his coat and a look in his eyes that told Elena everything she needed to know. "How bad?" she'd asked. "Gone," he'd said. "The whole main structure. Barn's still standing, and the mill wasn't touched, but the house—" He'd trailed off, staring at nothing. Everything inside. All of it. Including the child's room, Elena thought, including Catherine's photographs and the little bed with the yellow quilt and the porcelain doll. All of it turned to ash and memory. She'd reached for his hand, and he'd let her take it, and they'd sat there in the small boarding house room without speaking, just holding on while the weight of everything they'd lost settled over them. Now, on the 4th day after Hargrove's arrest, Elena stood in the Ashford Hollow courthouse watching a federal prosecutor lay out the charges. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like half the town had shown up, drawn by scandal and the promise of watching a powerful man fall. Hargrove sat at the defense table in a wrinkled suit, his perfect composure completely shattered. His lawyer, a nervous man from the state capitol, kept wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. The evidence was overwhelming. Even a fool could see there was no way out. The defendant orchestrated a systematic campaign of fraud and extortion spanning 7 years, the prosecutor said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. He used his position as banker to manipulate loan terms, falsify debts, and force families from their land. When his victims couldn't pay, he foreclosed on properties he himself had sabotaged. And when that wasn't enough, he turned to violence, arson, assault, attempted murder. The prosecutor turned to face Hargrove directly. Victor Hargrove didn't just steal property, He destroyed lives. Families lost their homes, their livelihoods, everything they'd built. Some left the county entirely, displaced by a man who saw them as nothing more than obstacles to his ambition. Elena watched Hargrove's face. He wasn't looking at the prosecutor or the judge. He was staring at the table in front of him, his jaw tight, and she could see the fury burning behind his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He was just angry he'd been caught. The judge, a stern woman brought in from Helena specifically for this case, listened to everything without expression. When the prosecutor finished, she looked at Hargrove. "Does the defendant wish to speak?" Hargrove's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but Hargrove shook his head and stood. "I have nothing to say to this court." "Very well." The judge straightened her papers. "Victor Hargrove, you are hereby bound over for trial on 43 counts of fraud, 12 counts of extortion, 3 counts of arson, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Bail is denied. You will remain in federal custody pending trial." The gavel came down. Hargrove's face went white. His lawyer tried to object, but the marshals were already moving forward, taking Hargrove by the arms and leading him toward the back door of the courtroom. As he passed Elena's row, Hargrove's eyes found hers. The look he gave her was pure venom. She met his gaze without flinching, and after a moment he looked away. Then he was gone, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Elena felt Silas's hand on her shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." They pushed through the crowd and out into the cold afternoon air. People were gathering on the courthouse steps, talking in urgent clusters. Elena heard her name more than once, saw people pointing. She kept her head down and followed Silas toward the street. "Elena," she turned. Her father stood at the bottom of the steps, his hat in his hands. He looked older than she remembered, his face haggard and gray. Behind him, her mother stood silent as always. Elena's first instinct was to keep walking, but something made her stop. "Papa," she said. Thomas Carter climbed the steps slowly, like each one hurt. When he reached her, he didn't meet her eyes. I need to apologize." "For what?" Elena's voice was flat. "Selling me? Or not having the courage to stop it?" Thomas flinched. "I thought I was saving the family. Hargrove told me. He said it was the only way, that if I didn't agree, we'd lose everything. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have told me the truth," Elena said. "You could have let me decide for myself instead of just signing papers and handing me over like property." "I know." Thomas's voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was weak and desperate, and I failed you. I've been failing you for years." Elena looked at her mother, who still hadn't spoken. Margaret Carter stood like a statue, her face blank, and Elena felt a surge of anger so strong it surprised her. "And you?" she asked her mother. "Do you have anything to say?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "What's done is done. There's no changing it now." "That's it? That's all you have to say?" "What do you want from me, Elena? Tears? Apologies?" Margaret's voice was bitter. "I told you to sign the papers because it was the only way to keep a roof over Daniel's head. Would you rather we'd all been on the street?" "I'd rather you'd fought," Elena said. "I'd rather you'd tried to find another way, instead of just accepting that I was the price that had to be paid." Margaret looked away. "You don't understand what it's like. You're young. You don't know how the world works." "I know more now than I ever wanted to," Elena said. She turned back to her father. "The house is secure now. The debt's cleared and Hargrove's in jail. You and Mama and Daniel are safe. That's all I came here to do." "Elena," Thomas reached for her arm, but she pulled back. "I'm glad you're safe," she said. "Truly. But I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." She turned and walked down the steps. Silas fell into step beside her, and they left her parents standing there in the cold. They walked in silence until they reached the boarding house. Inside their room, Elena sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands. She wasn't crying. She was too angry to cry, but her whole body was shaking. "You all right?" Silas asked. "No," Elena said, "but I will be." He sat down beside her. "They didn't deserve what you did for them." "Maybe not, but I didn't do it for them. I did it for me." She looked at him. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I'd just run away and let everything fall apart. Even if they don't deserve my help, Daniel does. And I couldn't let him suffer because of what they did." Silas nodded slowly. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. I feel exhausted. That's what strength looks like most of the time, Silas said. Not grand gestures. Just getting up every day and doing what needs to be done, even when you're tired and angry and everything hurts. Elena leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her. They sat there as the light faded outside, two people who'd been thrown together by manipulation and greed, who'd survived fire and violence and betrayal, and who were somehow still standing. "What do we do now?" Elena asked finally. "We go back up the mountain," Silas said. "We rebuild. There's nothing left to rebuild. Then we build something new." He pulled back to look at her. "The land's ours now, free and clear. No debt, no Hargrove, no traps. We can do whatever we want with it." "What do you want?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop running from the past. I want to build something that lasts, and I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want you to stay, if you want to. I know this marriage wasn't your choice, and if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you're willing to try, to really try, not just survive, but actually build a life together, then I'd like that." Elena's throat tightened. A month ago, she would have run. She would have taken the first opportunity to leave this mountain and this man and never look back. But now, after everything they'd been through, the thought of leaving felt wrong. Not because she had to stay, but because she wanted to. "I'll stay," she said. "But not as your obligation, not as part of some contract. As my partner," Silas said. "As my wife. For real this time." "For real," Elena agreed. He kissed her then, tentative and careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. Elena kissed him back, and it felt like the first honest thing that had happened between them since the day they'd met. When they pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "It won't be easy, building up there with no house, winter coming on." "I don't care," Elena said. "Easy is overrated." The next morning, they rode back up to Iron Pine Ridge with Caleb in a wagon full of supplies. Marshal Grant had given them a letter confirming that all charges against them had been dropped, and that the property was legally theirs without encumbrance. It wasn't much, but it was something. The house was worse than Elena had imagined. The entire structure had collapsed in on itself, leaving only the stone chimney standing like a grave marker. Everything else was charred timber and ash, already being covered by fresh snow. The barn had survived, and the mill was intact, but the home, the place where Silas had lived with Catherine, where he'd raised his daughter, where Elena had spent those first lonely weeks, was gone completely. Silas stood in front of the ruins, his face unreadable. Elena came up beside him and took his hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." His voice was rough. "That house was full of ghosts anyway. Maybe this is what I needed." "Still, it hurts." "Yeah," Silas admitted. "It does." Caleb climbed down from the wagon and surveyed the damage. "We can salvage the foundation, clear the debris, rebuild on the same spot. It'll take time, but we can do it." "Not the same spot," Silas said suddenly. Both Elena and Caleb looked at him. "I don't want to rebuild where the old house stood. I want to start fresh. Different location, different design. Something that's ours, not a monument to what I lost." Elena felt something loosen in her chest. "Where?" Silas pointed toward the eastern slope, where the land opened up and the view stretched out over the valley. "There. More sunlight, better drainage. We could put in an orchard eventually, apples or cherries. Make something that grows instead of just cutting timber." "An orchard," Elena repeated. She liked the sound of that. Something permanent, something that would take years to bear fruit but would last for generations. "If you want," Silas said. "It's your home too now. You should have a say." Elena nodded. "I want that. The orchard, the new house, all of it." "Then that's what we'll build," Silas turned to Caleb. "You in?" "Hell yes, I'm in," Caleb said. "Someone needs to make sure you don't build the walls crooked." They spent the rest of that day clearing a space in the barn where they could live temporarily. It was rough, cold despite the stove they set up, cramped with 3 people sharing the space, but it was shelter. At night, they huddled around the stove and planned the new house, sketching rough designs on scraps of paper, arguing good-naturedly about room sizes and window placement. Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The fear that had been her constant companion since leaving Ashford Hollow was finally starting to fade. Hargrove was in jail. The land was secure. And for the first time in her life, she was building something that belonged to her, not inheriting someone else's plans or following someone else's rules. A week later, Brennan showed up at the Ridge. His head was still bandaged, but he was on his feet and looking determined. "I brought the original documents," he said, handing over a leather case. "The ones Hargrove's men stole from Caleb's place. Marshals recovered them from his house. Thought you might want them for your records." "Thanks," Silas said. He looked at the young man carefully. "You doing all right?" "Better than I deserve." Brennan's voice was quiet. "I helped him, for years. I didn't think about what I was really doing, just told myself I was following orders, doing my job, but I was part of it, part of destroying people's lives." "You came forward when it mattered," Elena said. "That counts for something." "Does it?" Brennan looked at her. "Because I can't stop thinking about all the families I helped him cheat, all the documents I filed, the signatures I witnessed. I was so focused on keeping my job that I didn't see, or didn't want to see, what was really happening." "So what are you going to do about it?" Silas asked. Brennan straightened. "I'm testifying at the trial. Everything I know, everything I did, and afterward I'm leaving banking. I'm done being part of that system." "What will you do instead?" "Don't know yet, but I'll figure something out." Brennan managed a weak smile. "Anyway, I just wanted to return those documents and say thank you. You could have left me to face Hargrove alone, but you didn't. I won't forget that." After he left, Elena and Silas went through the documents carefully. Among them was the original marriage contract, the one with all the hidden clauses and trap language. Elena stared at it for a long moment, then carried it to the stove and threw it in. "What are you doing?" Silas asked. "Getting rid of it," Elena said, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flames. "That contract doesn't mean anything anymore. If we're staying married, it's because we choose to be, not because some banker wrote it into a legal document." Silas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "We should do it properly then. Get married again, the right way." "We're already married." "We went through a ceremony because Hargrove forced us to. That's not a real marriage. I want to marry you because I love you, not because some contract says I have to." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "You love me?" "I do," Silas said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. "I know it's fast, and I know this started wrong, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being an obligation and started being the person I can't imagine living without. So yes, I love you, and I want to marry you properly if you'll have me." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. Again, properly." They got married in Caleb's cabin 2 weeks later, with Marshal Grant officiating and Brennan as witness. It was nothing like the first ceremony. No cold courthouse, no forced vows, no sense of trap closing. Elena wore a simple dress she'd bought in town, and Silas wore clean clothes and actually smiled. Caleb got drunk and gave a rambling toast about stubborn fools who were too dumb to quit when they should. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. That night, they went back to their temporary home in the barn, and for the first time they shared a bed not out of obligation or survival, but because they wanted to. Elena fell asleep in Silas's arms, listening to his heartbeat, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Winter hit hard that year. The snow piled up 6 feet deep in places, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in its bucket overnight. But they kept working. Silas and Caleb cleared the old house site and started laying foundation stones for the new one. Elena managed their supplies and helped where she could, learning to handle tools she'd never touched before. Her hands got rough and calloused. Her back ached constantly, but she didn't mind. She was building something real. They worked through Christmas and into the new year. By February, the frame of the new house was up, rough timber walls, open to the sky, but standing. It looked raw and unfinished, but Elena could see what it would become. Rooms where they'd live and eat and sleep. A real home, built by their own hands. One evening, as they were finishing work for the day, a rider came up the mountain. Elena's hand went instinctively to the rifle they kept nearby, but Silas shook his head. "That's not trouble," he said. "That's the mail carrier." The rider, a grizzled man in his 50s, handed over a packet of letters and a newspaper. "Haven't seen you folks in months," he said. Figured you might want to know what's been happening in town. What's the news? Caleb asked. Hargrove's trial started last week. They're saying it'll be the biggest case this county's ever seen. The carrier shook his head. Never would have thought it of him. Always seemed like such a respectable man. Appearances can fool you, Silas said. After the carrier left, they opened the newspaper. The trial was front-page news. 37 witnesses had testified so far, all telling stories of fraud and manipulation and lives destroyed. The prosecutor was calling it the most extensive corruption case in territorial history. Hargrove's defense was falling apart. His lawyers had tried to claim he was simply an aggressive businessman, but the evidence was too overwhelming. They're predicting 15 to 20 years, Elena read aloud. Maybe more. Good, Silas said. It's not enough, but it's something. Among the letters was one from Elena's father. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. The letter was short, written in Thomas's shaky handwriting. Elena, I know you said you can't forgive me, and I understand, but I wanted you to know that I've been meeting with the other families Hargrove cheated. We're organizing, trying to help each other rebuild. It's the least I can do after staying silent for so long. Your mother and I are talking again. Really talking, for the first time in years. She's struggling, but she's trying. Daniel asks about you constantly. He wants to come visit when the weather clears. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to Hargrove, fighting back when the rest of us were too afraid, it changed things. People are talking now. They're not just accepting what powerful men tell them anymore. Thank you for that. Your father. Elena folded the letter and set it aside. She didn't know how she felt about it. The anger was still there, but it had dulled somehow, worn down by time and distance. Maybe forgiveness would come eventually, or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, she was building her own life now, and she didn't need their approval to do it. By March, the house had walls and a roof. They moved out of the barn and into the unfinished structure, sleeping in a single completed room while they worked on the rest. It was cramped and drafty, and nothing like the grand homes Elena had imagined as a girl, but it was theirs. Caleb moved back to his own place once the weather cleared, promising to return when it was time to start the orchard. You two need time alone, he said, grinning. Build your nest or whatever it is newlyweds do. After he left, the ridge felt quieter. Elena and Silas fell into an easy routine. Work during the day, simple meals in the evening, quiet nights by the fire. They talked about things Elena had never discussed with anyone. Dreams and fears, regrets and hopes. Silas told her about Catherine and his daughter, about the guilt he'd carried for so long. Elena told him about her childhood, about feeling invisible in her own family, about the anger she still carried toward her parents. You think you'll ever let that go? Silas asked one night. I don't know, Elena admitted. Part of me wants to, but another part thinks they don't deserve that. Forgiveness isn't about what they deserve, Silas said. It's about what you need to move forward. Is that what you did? With yourself? I'm trying to. He stared into the fire. Catherine's letter said it wasn't my fault, but I blamed myself anyway for years. I think I needed that blame. It gave me something to focus on besides the grief. He looked at her. You helped me let it go. Showed me there was still life worth living. We helped each other, Elena said. By May, the house was finished. 2 stories, 6 rooms, solid timber walls, and windows that looked out over the valley. It wasn't fancy, but it was well built and comfortable. Elena planted a garden beside it, vegetables, flowers, herbs. Silas cleared the eastern slope and began marking out where the orchard would go. One afternoon, while Silas was working at the mill, Elena walked to the old house site. The snow had melted, revealing the charred foundation and scattered debris. She'd avoided this place since they'd started rebuilding, but now she felt drawn to it. She picked through the ruins carefully, not sure what she was looking for. Most of it was just ash and scorched wood, but then her hand closed around something solid. She pulled it from the debris and wiped it clean. The porcelain doll. Somehow, impossibly, it had survived. The dress was burned away, the hair gone, but the face was intact, those same painted eyes staring up at her. Elena carried it back to the new house and set it on the mantel. When Silas came home and saw it, he stopped in the doorway. You found it, he said quietly. It was under the rubble. I thought everything was destroyed, but... Elena touched the doll's cracked cheek gently. I know it's not much, but it's something that survived. Silas came to stand beside her, staring at the doll. Her name was Sarah, he said. My daughter. She loved that doll. Catherine bought it for her first birthday. It was the first time he'd said his daughter's name aloud. Elena took his hand and held it tight. Thank you for telling me, she said. Thank you for finding her, Silas replied, for bringing her home. That night, they lay in bed in their new house, listening to the wind in the pines. Elena thought about everything that had brought them here. The debt and the manipulation, the fire and the fear, the long climb back from ruin. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been fair, but they'd survived it. I think we're going to be all right, she said. Silas pulled her closer. I think so too. In June, the trial ended. Hargrove was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The judge also ordered him to pay restitution to all his victims, money that would be seized from his remaining assets. It wasn't everything the families had lost, but it was something. Elena and Silas received a letter from Marshal Grant confirming the verdict and thanking them for their testimony. Justice moves slowly, Grant wrote, but it moves. What you did mattered. Elena kept the letter in a drawer, along with her father's letter and the marriage certificate from their second wedding. Evidence that they'd fought and won, that they'd built something real from the ashes of what Hargrove had tried to destroy. By late summer, they had 30 apple trees planted on the eastern slope. The trees were young, barely more than saplings, but in a few years they'd bear fruit. Elena stood among them one evening, watching the sun set over the valley, and felt Silas come up behind her. What are you thinking about? He asked. How strange life is, Elena said. A year ago, I thought my life was over, and now? Now I'm standing in an orchard we planted together, in a house we built, on land that's ours. And I'm happy, actually happy. She turned to face him. That's strange, isn't it? That something that started so wrong could become something so right? Not strange, Silas said. Just proof that endings aren't always endings. Sometimes they're just beginnings wearing disguises. Elena laughed. That's almost poetic. Don't tell Caleb. He'll never let me hear the end of it. They walked back to the house hand in hand as the stars came out. Inside, Elena lit the lamps and started making dinner while Silas worked on plans for expanding the mill. It was ordinary and domestic, and everything Elena had never thought she wanted. But she did want it. She wanted this life, this man, this home they'd built from nothing. And for the first time since she'd signed those papers in her father's parlor, Elena Mercer, felt like she was exactly where she belonged. That night, wrapped in Silas's arms with the sound of the wind outside and the warmth of the fire below, Elena thought about hope, how it could be crushed but never quite killed, how it could survive fire and violence and betrayal and still find a way to grow, like apple trees on a mountain slope, like love born from survival, like a life built from the ashes of someone else's greed. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and imperfect and marked by scars that would never fully fade. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Autumn came to Iron Pine Ridge with a violence that surprised even Silas. The first storm hit in early September, 3 weeks earlier than usual, bringing winds that bent the young apple trees nearly horizontal and rain that turned the mountain paths to rivers of mud. Elena stood at the window of their bedroom watching the storm tear through the valley below, one hand pressed against the glass, the other resting on the slight swell of her belly. She was 3 months pregnant. They'd found out in August, and the news had hit them both like lightning. Unexpected, terrifying, wonderful. Silas had gone quiet when she told him, his face draining of color, and for a horrible moment Elena thought he was going to walk out. But then he'd pulled her into his arms and held on so tight she could barely breathe. And when he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I'm scared," he'd said. "I know," Elena had whispered back. "Me too." They hadn't talked much about it since. There was too much fear wrapped up in the idea of a child, too many memories of what Silas had lost. But Elena felt the baby growing inside her every day, felt the shift in her body, the exhaustion, the strange sense of something both foreign and fundamental taking root. She was going to be a mother. The thought still didn't feel real. The wind howled, and one of the shutters tore loose with a crack like gunfire. Silas appeared in the doorway, already pulling on his coat. "I'm going to secure the barn," he said. "The horses are spooked." "I'll come with you." "No." His voice was firm. "You stay inside where it's safe." Elena bristled. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "I know that." Silas came over and kissed her forehead. "But humor me, please." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He was terrified of losing her the way he'd lost Catherine. She could see it in every protective gesture, every time he insisted she rest or refused to let her lift anything heavy. It was suffocating sometimes, but it came from a place of such deep fear that she couldn't bring herself to fight him on it. "Fine," she said. "But if you're not back in 10 minutes, I'm coming after you." Deal. He went out into the storm, and Elena returned to the window to watch. She could just make out his shape moving through the rain toward the barn, hunched against the wind. The apple trees on the eastern slope were thrashing wildly, and for a moment Elena feared they'd be torn from the ground entirely. But they held, their roots digging deep into the mountain soil. Silas disappeared into the barn. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Elena was reaching for her coat when she heard it, a sound like thunder, but wrong. Too sharp, too sustained. She ran to the front window and looked out toward the mill, the lumber operation. Something was wrong. Elena grabbed a lantern and ran outside before she could think better of it. The rain hit her like a physical blow, soaking through her clothes instantly. She struggled toward the mill, the wind trying to push her back with every step. As she got closer, she saw flames. Despite the rain, despite the wind, something was burning. The main storage shed where they kept the finished lumber, the one attached to the mill building. Fire licked up the walls, spreading fast even in the storm. "Silas!" Elena screamed. He appeared from the barn at a run, saw the flames, and cursed. "Get back to the house." "The mill." "I know! Just get back inside." But Elena didn't move. She stood there watching as Silas ran toward the burning shed, and in the flickering firelight she saw something that made her blood freeze. A figure, moving away from the flames. A man on horseback, disappearing into the trees. This wasn't the storm's work. This was arson. Silas was trying to save what lumber he could, dragging boards away from the flames and into the rain. Elena ran to help him, ignoring his shouts to go back. They worked frantically, pulling out everything they could reach, but the fire was spreading too fast. Within minutes, the entire storage shed was engulfed, and the flames were starting to catch on the mill building itself. "We have to let it go," Elena said, grabbing Silas's arm. "It's not worth dying for. That's our livelihood. And you're my husband." Elena pulled harder. "Come on." Silas hesitated, then let her pull him back. They retreated to a safe distance and watched as the fire consumed the shed and started eating into the mill. The rain wasn't enough to stop it. By dawn, when the storm finally passed, both structures were nothing but smoking ruins. Silas stood in the mud, staring at the destruction, his face empty. Elena came up beside him and took his hand. "We'll rebuild," she said. "With what money?" His voice was flat. "That was everything. All the timber we'd cut, all the equipment, gone. We still have the land, the house, the orchard. The orchard won't produce for years." Silas pulled his hand away and walked closer to the ruins. "And I saw him, the man who set this. He was watching from the trees." Elena's stomach clenched. "Who was it?" "I don't know. But someone wants us off this mountain." He turned to look at her, and there was something dark in his eyes. "Hargrove's in prison, but that doesn't mean his reach is gone. He had people working for him, enforcers, accomplices. Maybe one of them decided to finish what he started. Then we go to the marshals. And tell them what? That I maybe saw someone in the dark during a storm?" Silas shook his head. "We have no proof. No witnesses except us." "So, what do we do?" Silas didn't answer. He just stared at the smoking ruins, and Elena felt fear settle cold in her chest. They'd fought so hard to build this life, and now it was slipping away again. Caleb arrived 2 days later, brought by smoke signals he'd seen from his cabin. He took one look at the destroyed mill and let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "that's bad." "That's one word for it," Silas said. They were sitting on the porch of the house, drinking coffee and trying to figure out what came next. The insurance money wouldn't be enough to rebuild. Silas had only carried basic coverage, and arson wasn't included. They had some savings, but not nearly enough. The timber business was dead, at least for now. You could sell, Caleb said carefully. The land's worth something, especially now that it's clear of debt. Take the money, start over somewhere else. No. Silas's voice was hard. We're not running again. I'm not suggesting running. I'm suggesting strategic retreat. It's the same thing. Caleb looked at Elena. What do you think? Elena had been thinking about it constantly for 2 days. The practical part of her knew Caleb was right. They couldn't rebuild without money, and staying here with a baby coming was risky. But another part of her, the part that had fought tooth and nail to keep this place, couldn't bear the thought of leaving. I think, she said slowly, that we need help, real help. Not just money, but people, community. Both men looked at her. What do you mean? Silas asked. I mean, we can't do this alone anymore. We've been isolating ourselves up here, trying to be self-sufficient, but that's not sustainable. If someone's targeting us, we need allies. And if we're going to rebuild, we need more than just the 3 of us. Who do you suggest? Caleb asked. Elena took a breath. The families Hargrove cheated. The ones my father mentioned in his letter. They know what it's like to lose everything and have to start over. Maybe some of them would be willing to help if we offered them something in return. Like what? Silas asked. Work, land, a stake in what we're building here. Elena's mind was racing now, the idea taking shape. We have space. We could build cabins, bring in families who need a fresh start. They could help rebuild the mill, work the lumber operation, tend the orchard. In exchange, they'd get housing and a share of the profits. Silas was quiet for a long moment. You're talking about creating a community, a settlement. I'm talking about not being alone anymore, Elena said. About building something bigger than just us. Something that can't be destroyed by one fire or one vengeful man. Caleb grinned. I like it. It's ambitious as hell, but I like it. Silas looked at Elena, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. You're sure about this? Bringing people up here? It'll change everything. Everything's already changed, Elena said. We just need to decide if we're going to let that break us or make us stronger. Silas reached for her hand. All right, let's do it. They spent the next week traveling to Ashford Hollow and the surrounding areas, meeting with families who'd been victims of Hargrove's scheme. Elena's father helped arrange the meetings, and though Elena still felt the sting of resentment when she saw him, she put it aside for the greater goal. The families were wary at first. They'd been burned before by promises that sounded too good to be true. But when Elena and Silas laid out the proposal, honest work for honest pay, a chance to rebuild together, people started listening. By the end of the second week, they had commitments from 4 families. The Dawsons, who'd lost their farm to Hargrove's manipulation. The Chens, immigrants who'd been cheated out of their mining claim. The Reeves, a widow and her 3 grown sons who needed work. And the Porters, a young couple with a baby not much older than Elena's would be. They all came up to Iron Pine Ridge together in late October, their possessions loaded in wagons, hope and uncertainty written on their faces. Elena stood on the porch of the house and watched them arrive and felt something shift inside her. This was no longer just her and Silas's refuge. This was becoming something larger, something that belonged to all of them. The first few weeks were chaos. They set up temporary shelters while they worked on building proper cabins. The men, and some of the women, started clearing the mill site and salvaging what they could. The children ran wild through the trees, their laughter strange and wonderful after so much silence. Elena organized supplies and coordinated work schedules, her pregnancy growing more obvious but not slowing her down. Silas was different with people around, less closed off, more willing to delegate and trust. Elena watched him work with the Reeves brothers, showing them how to fell trees properly, and saw glimpses of the man Catherine must have known, patient, capable, almost warm. One evening, as they lay in bed exhausted from another long day, Silas said, "You were right about this, about needing people." "We all need people," Elena said. "That's not weakness. That's just being human." I forgot that for a while. After I lost Catherine and Sarah, I convinced myself that being alone was safer, that if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't lose them. He rolled onto his side to face her. "But that's not living." That's just existing. And now? Now I'm terrified every day that something will happen to you or the baby. But I'm also happy. Really happy, for the first time in years, and I think that's worth the fear." Elena kissed him. "It is." By December, they had 3 cabins built and a 4th underway. The mill site was cleared and foundation work had begun on a new structure, smaller than the old one, but more efficient. The apple trees had survived the storm and were settling into winter dormancy, their bare branches reaching toward the gray sky. Christmas came, and the whole community gathered in Elena and Silas's house for a meal. It was crowded and loud and messy, children underfoot, adults talking and laughing, food passed around until everyone was stuffed. Elena looked around the table at all these faces, people who'd been strangers 2 months ago, now becoming friends, neighbors, family, and felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Chen noticed. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine," Elena said, laughing. I never thought I'd have this." "Have what?" "This. Home. People. All of it." Elena wiped her eyes. "A year ago I thought my life was over, and now look." Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, usually when we least expect it." That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Elena and Silas sat by the fire. Elena was exhausted, her back aching, her feet swollen, but she felt content in a way she'd never experienced before. "I have something for you," Silas said. He pulled a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. Elena unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of apple blossoms. She opened it and found a letter inside, written in Silas's careful handwriting. "Elena, a year ago, I bought a wife to settle a debt I didn't understand. I thought I was accepting another burden, another piece of guilt to carry. I was wrong. You came into my life like a storm, disruptive, fierce, refusing to be ignored. You pushed when I wanted to retreat. You asked questions when I wanted silence. You saw through my walls and wouldn't let me hide. You saved me, not from Hargrove or debt or violence, but from myself. From the prison I'd built out of grief and fear. You showed me that life could still be lived, that joy was still possible, that letting someone in wasn't weakness, but strength. This past year with you has been the hardest and the best of my life. We've lost much, but we've built more. And now we're about to bring a child into this world, into the home and community we've created together. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll succeed or fail, if the orchard will thrive or the mill will prosper. But I know that whatever comes, I want to face it with you. Thank you for choosing to stay. Thank you for choosing me. Forever yours, Silas." Elena read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, Silas was watching her with an expression so open and vulnerable it made her heart ache. "I love you," she said. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Silas said. "More than I thought I could love anyone again." They held each other by the fire as snow began to fall outside. 2 people who'd been forced together by manipulation and greed but had chosen each other in the end. It wasn't a perfect love story. It was messy and complicated and built on foundations of trauma and loss. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that made it more valuable than any fairy tale. The baby came in March, 2 weeks early, and in the middle of a late-season snowstorm. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Porter attended the birth, while Silas paced outside, his face pale with fear. It was a difficult labor, 12 hours of pain that left Elena exhausted and shaking, but when she finally heard the baby's first cry, all the pain fell away. "It's a girl," Mrs. Chen said, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Elena's arms. Elena looked down at her daughter, red-faced, wrinkled, perfect, and felt something break open inside her chest. Love. Fierce and overwhelming and terrifying. This tiny person was depending on her for everything, and Elena had no idea if she was ready for that responsibility. But then Silas came in, and she saw his face when he looked at the baby. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, and when he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, his fingers were shaking. "Can I hold her?" he asked. Elena handed the baby over carefully. Silas cradled his daughter like she was made of glass, staring down at her with an expression of pure wonder. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one. I'm your papa." The baby quieted at his voice. her tiny eyes trying to focus on his face. Silas let out a shaky laugh that was half sob. "What should we name her?" Elena asked. Silas looked at her, then back at the baby. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Elena felt tears well up again. It was perfect. After everything they'd been through, after all the darkness and fear and loss, they'd created something beautiful, something that represented everything they'd fought for. "Hope Mercer," Elena said. "Welcome to the world." The community rallied around them in the weeks after Hope's birth. Someone was always bringing food or offering to help with chores. The children made a toy rattle from carved wood and dried beans. Mrs. Dawson knitted a blanket. Even Caleb, tough old bachelor that he was, brought a small stuffed rabbit he'd bought in town. "Don't get used to this," he said gruffly when Elena thanked him. "I'm not going soft." "Of course not," Elena said, smiling. By summer, the new mill was operational and they'd begun processing timber again. The orchard was thriving, the young trees growing strong and healthy. 2 more families had joined the community, drawn by word of mouth about the settlement on Iron Pine Ridge. They were building a school, just a small one-room building, but enough to teach the children who were growing up here. Elena stood on the porch one evening, Hope asleep in her arms, watching the sunset over the valley. She could hear voices from the settlement below, people talking and laughing, children playing, the sounds of a community finding its rhythm. It was nothing like the life she'd imagined for herself a year and a half ago, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed up. Silas came out and put his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is," Elena said. "How the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing." "The marriage?" "All of it. Being sold off, being trapped up here, all the fear and anger and fighting. If none of that had happened, I wouldn't have this." She looked down at Hope's sleeping face. "I wouldn't have you or her or any of this." "Do you regret it?" Silas asked. "Any of it?" Elena thought about it honestly. "I regret the pain, the fear, the way my father failed me and how Hargrove almost destroyed us. But the rest? No, because it taught me something." "What's that?" "That you can't control what happens to you. You can only control what you do with it." Elena shifted Hope to her other arm. "Hargrove tried to make me a victim, tried to trap me in a life I didn't choose, and for a while I was a victim. But then I decided to fight back, to take control of my own story. And that made all the difference." Silas kissed the top of her head. "You're stronger than you know." "We both are. We had to be." They stood there together as the stars came out, 3 people, a man, a woman, and their baby daughter, who'd been forged in fire and come out stronger. Below them, the settlement was settling in for the night, lights flickering in cabin windows, smoke rising from chimneys. A community built from nothing, from loss and second chances, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Elena thought about Victor Hargrove sitting in a prison cell hundreds of miles away and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just nothing. He'd tried to destroy them, but he'd failed, and his failure had created something he never could have imagined, a place where people who'd been broken by greed and manipulation could come together and rebuild. That was the real victory. Not his imprisonment, but what they'd built in spite of him. Hope stirred in Elena's arms, making small, sleepy noises. Elena rocked her gently, and the baby settled again. "You know what I realized?" Elena said softly. "We never got the life we thought we were supposed to have. Neither of us. You lost your first family, and I was sold away from mine. But we made a new family anyway. Not the one we planned, but the one we needed. And the one we chose," Silas added. "That's important too." "Yes," Elena agreed. "The one we chose." Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, they would tell her the story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The debt and the manipulation, the fire and the fear, the long fight to build something real from the ashes of someone else's greed. They would tell her about Victor Hargrove and what he tried to take from them. And they would tell her about the choice they made to fight back, to refuse to be victims, to build a life worth living. But for now, on this evening with the stars bright overhead and the community they'd built settling into sleep below them, Elena simply held her daughter and her husband and felt grateful. Grateful for the hard road that had brought them here, for the strength they'd found in each other, for the life they'd built from nothing. Iron Pine Ridge wasn't a refuge anymore. It wasn't a prison or a trap or a place of exile. It was home, built by hand and heart, and the stubborn determination of people who refused to stay broken. And that, Elena thought as she carried Hope inside to bed, was worth every bit of pain it had taken to get here. Every tear, every fight, every moment of fear and doubt. Because in the end, they'd won. Not by destroying their enemies, but by refusing to let those enemies destroy them. They'd taken the worst thing that could happen and turned it into something beautiful. And that was a kind of victory no one could ever take away.
The Costco's. Costco right now for minced beef is, oh, Soro, thank you so much for 7 months. Love your face. Hope you're doing well. Which is 91% lean. It is, okay, so that's 5 pounds, right? I have to bring out a calculator for this. Seems a little pricey. $8.04 a pound. What the fuck? That might be marked up because it's Instacart. That's possibly why. That is insane. But yeah, it's cheaper to get it's $7.97. At least at Wally World, it's like per pound. That's crazy. Okay, the 90/10 is $7.26 here. Whoa, hello, Kara. Carolina.
The vessel is
Thank you so much for the raid. Welcome in. Can we get a shout out for Kara? We have a store chain near us that does 5 for $25. The single packs are perfect for 2 people. Oh, that sounds fantastic. I should look in to see if there's like a butcher here that's cheaper. Or maybe going to the local Asian grocery store. A store that will do 5 to 25 a couple times a year. We stock up, but then, oh, that's good to know that happens. Okay, I might look into that. See if there's a place here that does it. You're not eating beef these days, Malfun?